Thank you. My name is Gracelyn Jones, and I am your TWIG president this year. And I have the honor of introducing Amanda Garcia today. We're so thankful that she's here. And for those of you who have never been to a TWIG meeting before, you're getting a really good one. If you don't know, Amanda Garcia is a senior attorney and the director of the Tennessee office of the Southern Environmental Law Center. Amanda and her team work across the state to protect Tennessee's clean water, promote clean energy, preserve our natural treasures, and ensure a healthy environment for all. Amanda will be sharing some of her office's recent work to address climate change in Middle Tennessee, including protecting the Duck River in severe weather and fighting a proposed methane gas pipeline that would run through Stewart, Houston, and Dickson counties. So without further ado, Amanda, I will pass it back to you.
Great, thank you so much, Gracelyn. And I will just apologize in advance that my cats seem to be in quite a state this morning. I don't know if it's the thunderstorm or what, but you may see my cat Cinnamon making multiple appearances. She's an expert Zoom bomber, so apologies for that. But thank you all so much for having me this morning. I'm really excited to be here with you. I am going to try to go ahead and share my screen. So bear with me for just a minute because we will see if I can. It's not letting me. Let's see. Let me try this again. Okay. Can you all see that?
Yes, we can see it.
Perfect. So as Gracelyn just mentioned, I'm the Tennessee Office Director for the Southern Environmental Law Center. And I just thought I would share a little bit about the work that we do across the region for folks who might not be familiar with our organization. So we're a regional law and policy organization. We have more than 80 attorneys working across 6 southeastern states. And those states include Virginia, North and South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, and of course, our beloved Tennessee. We also have an office in DC to help with federal policy. And we work across a broad range of program areas. So energy and air, water quality, wildlife, land and community, which tends to be centered on transportation and land use, and coasts and wetlands. So, and forests, sorry, public lands. And in our office here in Tennessee, I would say the bulk of our work, at least historically, has been focused on energy and air and water quality, but we do also engage in work on throughout all of our different program areas, and a lot of them overlap. So we just talked about the Duck River and how biodiverse it is. So that would be something that addresses wildlife and water quality, for example. Those things are pretty, and land use, all of those things are kind of interrelated. So in our Tennessee office, we have 6 attorneys, soon to be 7 attorneys. And then we have a communications manager and 2 administrative support staff. So we are about a 10-person office. And today I am really excited to be sharing with you some of the work we have been doing to address climate change in Tennessee. I'm going to talk specifically about a recent victory and a current opportunity for addressing climate change in Middle Tennessee. So let's start with the good news, protecting the Duck River. This is a matter that we have been involved in on behalf of the Nature Conservancy and the Tennessee Wildlife Federation.
Hey, Amanda, sorry to cut you off, but we're still seeing your main PowerPoint with the first slide on it.
Oh, shoot. Okay. It says I am screen sharing.
If you have double monitors, it might be, we're seeing,
No.
Maybe put it in slideshow mode.
It's in slideshow mode.
See that.
Let me try just stopping and starting the share again and see if that helps. Sorry, y'all. All right, now do you see a beautiful picture of the Duck River?
So we're still seeing your main PowerPoint application slide, but if you exit your slideshow and just click through the thumbnails on the side, we should be able to follow you.
Okay. So now you see the slides on the side and a beautiful picture of the Duck River.
Exactly, yes.
Okay, we will do it that way then. Thank you, Jen. So this is the Duck River. How many people on this call have paddled on the Duck or fished or hiked along the Duck? I can't actually see you all, but I hope everyone is raising their hand because this is an incredible natural treasure here in Tennessee. As I mentioned before, it's one of the most biodiverse rivers in North America. And because of its location, so here's the biodiversity, you can see just an incredible number of fish species, incredible number of freshwater mussel species, all sorts of macroinvertebrates, just blessing the river with not just their own existence, but also helping to keep it clean and a very healthy ecosystem. The Duck River also provides drinking water for lots and lots of communities along the stretch. And you can see where the Duck River watershed is here. It stretches all the way from Manchester to Waverly. So from Manchester in the east to Waverly in the west, and then it's part of the Tennessee River watershed. So it ultimately meets up with the Tennessee River. So along this stretch, you can kind of see it goes through some counties that are experiencing a fair amount of growth. This is an area that's not too far from Nashville, just south of Nashville. And a lot of these counties are experiencing significant population increases, a lot of development. And what comes with that is the need for more water, right? More drinking water. The Duck River, lots of communities take their water from the Duck River for drinking water for their communities. So this is a map that kind of shows you where some of the drinking water intakes along the Duck River are, as well as a couple of the proposed water intakes. So our recent case involved a proposal by Marshall County to put in a new drinking water intake in anticipation of growth due to just the kind of urban sprawl happening around our Nashville area. And a challenge is that we're seeing a lot of pressure from growth in the area at the same time as we're seeing an increase in severe weather from climate change. And we're all very familiar with the severe weather that has come from flooding, right? We had the horrible flood in Waverly this past year. We've seen the Duck River floods regularly. But the flip side of that, climate change isn't just going to result in increased flooding, which of course is exacerbated by development. It's also going to result in periods of drought. That's what the scientists tell us. And in fact, this area experienced a very severe drought that some of you may remember it back in 2007. When that happened, the Duck River, because people are already taking water out of the Duck River for drinking water, the level of the Duck River was so low that it actually stranded mussel populations. It had a big impact on the wildlife of this incredibly diverse river. And so some of the species in this river are threatened or endangered, so they are protected by the federal Endangered Species Act. And of course, we want the mussels to survive and thrive just because they are, but we also need them because they filter the water. They help keep this water, this watershed clean, and that makes it available for people to drink without, a lot of treatment. They do obviously treat the water, but the dirtier it becomes, the harder it becomes for us to use it as drinking water. So when this Marshall County applied for a permit, and we the state proposed a permit. I believe at first it did not have minimum flow restrictions in it, but then there was a period of comment. The Nature Conservancy submitted comments. There was a public meeting that the Nature Conservancy and Tennessee Wildlife Federation and Southern Environmental Law Center all participated in. And ultimately the state, in order to protect the mussels and the water quality, put a minimum flow requirement in the permit, which basically says if the water falls below a certain level, you can't take more water out of the river. Marshall County and the Duck River Agency didn't like that restriction in the permit, or we think of it more as a protection rather than a restriction, and they appealed the permit. So in this case, the defendant, or in the permit appeal, was the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation. I see several folks from TWIG in this meeting, and the Southern Environmental Law Center, on behalf of Tennessee Wildlife Federation and the Nature Conservancy, intervened in the permit appeal to support the state in its effort to protect the mussel population and the water quality of the Duck River. There was some initial briefing in the case, and then the parties actually participated in a mediation, which is like a settlement negotiation, and ultimately came to an agreement to keep the water, the minimum flow protection in place, and to do some additional study to determine what the needs of the river are. And this is a great resolution of this permit appeal. Ultimately, I think what we all would like to see happen is regional watershed level planning to protect the Duck River, because it's not just about Marshall County wanting a permit. It's about lots of other communities potentially wanting a permit, or needing to provide drinking water for their communities, and balancing those needs with the needs of the watershed. So that, I think, is just a great example of Southern Environmental Law Centers and our Tennessee offices work to promote climate resilience in Tennessee. And a lot of our water work is focused on promoting climate resilience, because Tennessee is accustomed to being a water-rich community, a water-rich state, and that is going to look very different going forward. And our advocacy focuses on trying to prepare our Tennessee communities for the changes in weather patterns that are going to come with climate change. So that is the victory I wanted to share with you all. And my colleagues, George Nolan and Stephanie Biggs, led the charge on that case. The second issue I'm wanting to discuss with you is an opportunity, a current opportunity in our office, and something that we are very strongly engaged in, which is fighting the Tennessee Valley Authority's methane gas build out. So as you all saw in the trivia, TVA already has 26% of its, it's actually probably more than that at this point. That was in 2019. 26% of its electricity comes from methane gas. That's actually more than the amount that comes from coal at this point. So the coal plants are about 19%. The methane gas has actually surpassed the amount of coal. And when I say methane gas, some of you or most of you are probably familiar with the term natural gas. And I use the term methane gas to emphasize the fact that it is comprised, that so-called natural gas is comprised primarily of a greenhouse gas that is harmful in terms of climate impacts. So the Tennessee Valley Authority, as hopefully most of you know, is the primary electricity generation and transmission utility in Tennessee. They provide 99% of the power in our state. And they are also a bit of a unicorn. They're a federal utility. So the board is appointed by the president, and they were created during the Depression to provide electricity in rural areas that had not been electrified, and have grown over the past 80 years into a very, I'm sorry, they were also developed for flood control purposes, interestingly, during the Depression, and electricity provision was sort of their second mission. But over time, they have grown into a very large utility, the nation's largest federal utility and one of the largest utilities in the country. So they have chosen over the past year to propose about 5,000 megawatts of new methane gas plants in the region. And this is a very significant amount. It would essentially double the amount of methane gas plants in their fleet. And we are very concerned because for lots of reasons, and the methane gas plants not only increase greenhouse gas pollution, but they also require massive pipelines, which we'll talk a bit more about in a minute, and they result in water pollution, conventional air pollution in the communities near the plants, and they are potentially going to result in impacts to ratepayers, particularly as we move away from fossil fuels and natural gas or methane gas becomes more expensive. But they also are inconsistent with the current administration's goals, which include decarbonizing the electric grid by 2035. And the president has said we have a narrow moment to address climate change. That moment is now. And the last thing he had, now this is me talking, not President Biden, but the last thing we need is for our nation's largest federal utility to be doubling down on fossil fuels when the administration that appoints the board and the board serves at his pleasure has said we need to be moving away from fossil fuels and addressing climate change as quickly as possible. So this goal of decarbonizing the electric grid by 2035 isn't pulled out of thin air. It's part of an executive order, but the executive order is based on climate science. It's based on the fact that we need to have a decarbonized grid in order to support the transition toward electrification of our vehicles, which are also an equally, and actually I think now the larger source of greenhouse gas emissions in our country, as well as beneficial electrification of other parts of our economy. And the narrow moment is because we want to prevent the worst effects of climate change. So you all, this is a picture of Waverly, which actually is in the Duck River watershed. This was what the flooding looked like there last spring. These are the effects that we want to try to minimize going forward. So we've talked a lot about how much gas TVA already has. This is a portfolio. This is a kind of a pie chart of showing what the different resources in their on their grid are. Does anybody know what the big yellow, the biggest source is? I guess it says at the bottom, but sometimes people are surprised by how much nuclear power actually contributes to TVA's grid. The tiny sliver at the top is green sliver at the top is the renewables. The red is natural gas or methane gas. So you can see we've already got a lot of methane gas built into the system, and our concern is that we not lock in even more greenhouse gas emissions going forward. Methane itself, as I mentioned, is a greenhouse gas. It's actually 80 times more potent than carbon dioxide during the first 20 years when it's in the atmosphere. So building more methane gas actually means we will be exacerbating the short-term climate effects, as well as when you burn methane gas, it creates carbon dioxide. So you're also having long-term greenhouse gas warming as well. So what does this look like in Middle Tennessee? TVA's massive gas build out, which is among the largest proposed in the nation. So here in Middle Tennessee, we have the Cumberland plant. It's near Clarksville in Cumberland City, and it's a big, one of the biggest coal plants in TVA's fleet. TVA is planning to retire it, which is great and long overdue. It's a huge source of carbon dioxide emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. It's also a huge source of conventional pollution, including water pollution, toxic water pollution. So it is time to retire that plant, but at this narrow moment, it really matters what you replace that plant with. And TVA has recently issued a draft environmental impact statement where they identify that they want to replace this plant with a new methane gas plant. Now, the gas plant will be, it is proposed to be where the current coal plant is, but it requires a pipeline to be built across 3 counties, Stewart County, Houston County, and Dickson County, in order to supply the plant with methane gas. And so there are lots of landowners along that stretch who will potentially have to give up part of their land for the pipeline. The pipeline is proposed to cross, I believe it has more than 100 stream crossings. At some places, they're actually planning to blow up the stream in order to lay the pipe. So it's a very impactful, environmentally impactful process in addition to, the impacts that will happen from the ongoing operation. There's a lot of construction related impacts the pipeline. So SELC, Sierra Club, we're working with Appalachian Voices. We're working with Sierra Club and Appalachian Voices and a big coalition of folks across TVA territory to oppose this proposal and shift TVA toward a more a vision focused on clean renewable energy, which is available and is actually in many cases a least cost option going forward. And in addition to being out of step with federal climate goals, TVA is actually relying on the electricity demand from the Metro Nashville area, our community, as a reason why they need to build this methane gas plant. It's very inconsistent with our local climate goals. And I'm looking at Dodd Galbraith because we served on a committee advising the mayor about this a while back. And there have been several mayoral administrations now in our city who are committed to reducing the carbon impacts of Metro Nashville. And so this is really going in the opposite direction of both our local climate goals and our and the nation's climate goals. So all of that sounds bad, right? But it's also a huge opportunity. SELC has fought pipeline companies and won, fought pipeline projects and won, including here in Tennessee. So some of you may be familiar with our victory, the cancellation of the proposed Byhalia crude oil pipeline that would have run through a drinking water well field in an environmental justice community in Southwest Memphis. That victory was just last 4th of July weekend when the company announced that it would cancel the project. My colleagues in North Carolina and Virginia have also successfully stopped the Atlantic Coast Pipeline together with a large coalition of partners, just as we always work in partnership with local communities and community groups. So we can do this. We can definitely shift the course, but we need all of our community partners to help support the effort. And I am just hoping that you all will feel inspired to go and look at SELC's website. There is a new newsfeed post on the website that actually has a take action button that will allow you to comment on the draft environmental impact statement for the gas plant. And that process is open now. There will be other opportunities for public comment along the way. And we will be keeping folks informed about all of those opportunities. So I am happy to talk forever about either of these topics. But what I would love to do with Jen's permission is just open it up for questions about these matters or any other work that you might be familiar with that we're doing in our office or across the region. So thank you all very much and happy to answer questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amanda. And it wouldn't be a meeting without some technical problems. So thank you for your patience with that. We do have a few questions in the chat, and for everyone who's on, if you have a question or something you'd like Amanda to talk about, we have about 15-20 more minutes. And so feel free to put that in the chat, or if you'd like to just raise your hand and we can engage in more of a dialogue, that is totally welcome as well. So I wanted to kick it off with a question of my own, and this is getting back to the earlier part of your presentation where you were talking about the Duck River and some of the growth happening in that watershed and the need for more drinking water. And, you know, we're blessed to live in a very water-rich state, but we do have pockets of the state that experience drought and experience water supply concerns. And I think that becomes a little bit more challenging to talk about water conservation and how individuals or industries can do their part to conserve water when we do live in such a water-rich state relative to, in particular, states in the West. So I was wondering what your thoughts are on how we can do a better job educating the public about the importance of water conservation and the importance of, preserving some of our really beautiful natural rivers and other surface waters, when we do live in a state that people look outside and they say, hey, it rains a lot, why should we have water concerns?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jen. And I would actually expand it to say it's not just about surface water, right? Because we have the western third of our state that relies primarily on groundwater as the drinking water source. And we're learning more and more about how climate change is affecting the recharge of our underground aquifers as well. So I want to lift up the wonderful work being done by Protect Our Aquifer in Memphis, actually partnering with NASA to use some satellite tech. Now we're getting like beyond what I can actually intelligently describe, but they're using satellite technology to kind of look at evapotranspiration and patterns of how those patterns are changing over time as we see the climate impacts happening, changing our weather patterns. So it's not just surface water, but it definitely includes surface water. And I think it's a really good point that we're just not used. I grew up in California, actually. So I was used to turning off my faucet when I brush my teeth and, just not watering the lawn and all of those things. But I think it's a really great question in terms of how can we better bring awareness to the fact that even though, lots of us have streams running right nearby us, that we can't take them for granted anymore. And we certainly can't take the water quality for granted anymore either. I think you can't separate water quality and water quantity. I'm not sure that, our organization primarily educates through legal action and communications related to legal action. So that's kind of how we educate, but I know there are lots of other organizations in this meeting and in our community that are primarily focused on just straight up education. So one thing I guess that we can and should be doing is all of us working together to try to bring those messages to the fore. We also need to, one of you on this meeting needs to have, the mission of finding what we started out this call with, which is a way to make mussels look more charismatic. There we go.
Yeah,
Diane.
Diane, that's awesome. I love it. Awesome.
Jen,
thank you, Amanda.
So I've got some questions in the chat, and I'm going to try to address them.
I was going to go through and kind of read them out for you.
Thank you.
And we have another water related question. So Maris was asking if you've heard of the Water Authority and their plans to build a massive sewage facility and pipeline on Lick Creek in Hickman County, which would impact the Duck River. And if you could just talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, Maris, thanks. That's a great question and a big issue and hot topic in our community. We definitely are aware of it. We're in communication with the Friends of Lick Creek, as well as some other organizations in the area that are concerned about that project. So, it's another great example of the development pressure kind of coming to bear on, on our water systems. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, we can't separate that development pressure from climate change, because we are seeing changing weather patterns. We are increasingly concerned about flooding in lots of our communities, as well as drought situations. So yeah, it's definitely something that we're aware of and monitoring. So thank you for that question.
And then we do have a number of questions about kind of methane and energy. So Jennifer was asking, what are the benefits of methane? Why would TVA choose to use methane as an energy source?
Yeah, that's a good question, Jennifer. And I think one thing that TVA focuses on, TVA has traditionally been a central station kind of utility, right? Big plants that are generating lots and lots of megawatts of electricity or megawatt hours of electricity. And one thing that natural gas is probably attractive to a utility like TVA because it's familiar, right? It's the same sort of way they're used to running their grid. But it isn't the way that we are going to be running our grids going forward. And lots of utilities across the country have lots more renewables and energy efficiency and other clean resources on their grids. That and in general, there is a shift toward a more distributed way of providing electricity, and a way of providing electricity that integrates renewables and energy efficiency, which may need to be in different places. They're not going to be like all, I mean, you can do big utility scale projects, but you're still probably going to have them not just at one big plant. They're going to be in different areas. Something else that I think TVA finds challenging about renewables is that they, because they're a federal utility, they don't get the tax benefits from building. There's a production tax credit, I think, and an investment tax credit for, and some of you on this call probably know better than I do. But so they end up, somebody else builds the solar plants, and then they do a power purchase agreement to buy the power. And that's just not something that TVA has I mean, they do that even with natural gas and other resources, but hasn't historically been their preferred mode of operation. So I think there's just a lot of cultural and institutional change that can and should be happening in terms of the way that that TVA and its distribution utilities provide power for our communities.
Thanks, Amanda. We had a question from Dodd. He asked what you think about TVA's and Governor Lee's desire to build a modular nuclear plant, and if you know the type of modular technology that they're planning to use there.
I don't know a ton about the technology that they're proposing to use. I will say that, you know, Southern Environmental Law Center doesn't take a blanket position on nuclear power. But what we have observed in some of our other states in the region, and I think this is true for TVA as well, is that nuclear power plants are extremely expensive to build and can result in a significant burden being borne by the ratepayers. So you all may be familiar with the now canceled VC Summer plant in South Carolina, which has actually caused a big shakeup of the electric utility business in South Carolina. and a lot of different proposed reforms happening because they were because the way they were financing it, really just resulted in a lot of mismanagement and extra burdens being put on ratepayers. Similarly, in Georgia, the Vogel plant has struggled to, move forward without, they've had massive budget increases to try to get that plant finished. The Tennessee Valley Authority is really the only utility in the country that has finished building a new nuclear plant in the 21st century. And I can't help but think that that is partly attributable to the fact that they don't have a Public Utilities Commission regulating their rates and their finances the way that Georgia and South Carolina do. So they haven't had to really be accountable for those cost overruns, except through the rate increases, which have caused a fair amount of consternation among the local power company community. All that having been said, I think it's fine for TVA to be doing R&D for long-term solutions. We need to have long-term solutions that are carbon free. I do think that it does not make sense to be putting all of the eggs in that basket and not be doing everything that we can and should be doing right now using technologies that exist right now, like solar and wind and energy efficiency and demand response, which TVA hasn't invested very much in. It's a both and, right? Do the R&D for the long-term solutions for that last 10 or 20% of the grid that will need to be decarbonized down the road, and decarbonize as much as you can now using technologies that exist and are affordable and reliable now. So that's kind of our position on that. We're not against TVA doing R&D, but we want them to decarbonize as much as they can now.
We had a question about natural gas. So Ali asked if fracking happens in Tennessee, and if not, where the natural gas is being piped in from.
So there's not a lot of fracking, and maybe not any at all. Elaine might actually know. There have been proposals to frack in Tennessee. I think it just hasn't been economic to date. And so most of the methane gas, I believe, is coming from the Permian Basin at this point.
And then we had a couple questions about how people can get more involved. So Maris asked how the public can do their part to stop nuclear and gas expansions. And Michelle kind of tacked onto that and said, if one of TVA's reasons for gas plant is Nashville's demand, how could Nashville push back against that? Would that be a letter from NES, from the mayor, from the city council? So how can folks get more involved in this?
Yeah, great questions. In terms of local government, Michelle, yes, all of the above. I think as many local government voices and distributor or local power company voices that can be part of this process and, pointing to their own community's goals. I mean, we have local legislation with community greenhouse gas targets now. We have a new chief executive officer coming in at the Nashville Electric Service. We have a lot. We have a commitment by our mayor to, he's a climate mayor, so that they are actively trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the city. So I think all of those voices need to be part of this. And we're definitely, in conversation with various folks, but, tell your city council person. Actually, there were a couple city council members who, and I can only remember one right now, which was Bob Mendez, but there was another person who signed on, and I apologize, I can't remember who the other person was, actually put comments in the pipeline docket, basically saying our General Assembly is passing a law that's going to make it harder for local governments to act to regulate the siting of pipelines. And we really, FERC, we need you to step up, and, you know, we don't want this pipeline in our community. So so there's definitely a role for all of that, and just educating your local council people, educating folks you may be aware of. And I would actually expand that outward also. A lot of corporations have greenhouse gas and climate goals or renewable goals, and this is, you know, potentially crowding out or making it harder for them to comply with those goals in Tennessee. So if y'all are working with or involved with large companies that are concerned about climate change, then, and have their own greenhouse gas or renewables goals, I think that those are good and powerful voices to have participating here too. Maris,
Yeah,
in
those
terms
are
of-
Those are really great suggestions. Yeah, I do know that Nashville is also moving forward with developing a climate action plan. And just to give a little plug for them, they do have an open climate action survey that any resident of Nashville can take. So if there's anyone from Metro on the call and has the link to that survey, I took it last month and I think it's open until the end of May. So that could be a good call to action for TWIG members to sign on and take that survey also. We have just a couple minutes left, and Amanda, oh, thank you, Renee, for putting the survey link in the chat. I wanted to ask you, in all of these challenges we've talked about, we know that they're not going to impact everyone equally, and there are people who are going to be disproportionately impacted by so many of these challenges that we're talking about. So I was hoping you could close us out by just talking a little bit about some of the work that SELC is doing with environmental justice and the environmental justice lens that you're taking to approaching to some of these challenges.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Jen. So environmental justice is a huge priority for our office. And I mentioned earlier our Byhalia pipeline case, which involved a crude oil pipeline that was proposed to run through a predominantly Black community, or many predominantly Black neighborhoods in Southwest Memphis. That, you know, I think is kind of a paradigmatic example of not just environmental injustice, but it's obviously linked to climate change as well, right? I mean, both in the sense that these big pipeline projects often impact the construction of them often disproportionately impact low wealth, Black, Indigenous communities of color. And actually, I mean, the pipeline routes for the Cumberland pipeline this slide that I threw up earlier, there are low wealth communities along the pipeline route as well. So these pipeline projects just often are real sources of environmental injustice. And because low wealth, Black, Indigenous communities are also likely to suffer the first and most harmful effects of climate change related to flooding and other issues, it's kind of like a double whammy. Not only are you getting the, you know, construction and air pollution and water pollution impacts of the pipelines and the plants primarily focused in these communities, but they're also exacerbating climate change, which means that the worst effects are likely going to occur in those communities as well. I know I've talked about a lot of different comment periods, but there's actually a really important one open right now. So in Byhalia, the pipeline company wanted and did rely on when you cross streams, you have to get a 404 permit under the Clean Water Act. You can get an individual permit, which requires you to do some site-specific environmental analysis and also provide public notice and an opportunity to comment. But for the past few decades, pipeline companies have been able to rely on a general permit for these massive pipeline projects. And they do all of their permitting with the Army Corps behind closed doors, no public comment, no public input. So the Army Corps has actually, in part because of the Byhalia pipeline case, and they actually talk about it in their notice, is reviewing whether pipeline companies should be able to use this fast track process to get permission to cross rivers and streams and wetlands. And they're looking at it primarily from an environmental justice lens. And drinking water, because the Byhalia pipeline case also involved drinking water impacts. But so I think there's, a lot of our environmental justice work, we're focused both on cumulative impacts, like what are overburdened communities, and how do we prevent additional harms from being cited in these communities, and also making sure that people's voices are able to be heard. So in my mind, environmental justice really has two pieces. It's both like procedural justice and making sure people who are most proximate to a problem have a voice in the process, and then also substantive justice. Let's not keep piling on new polluting facilities in areas that are already bearing more than their fair share. So we're engaged, continue to be engaged on environmental justice issues across the state. We have very close partners in Memphis that we do a lot of work with, and have done a lot of work with over the past several years. But there are environmental justice communities and issues all across our state, and thanks for asking that question, because it's a really important piece of this and not disconnected from the climate work as well.
Thank you, Amanda, so much for spending your morning with us and educating us on so many of these topics. If you're on camera and want to give a round of applause or throw up some applause or thumbs up, Amanda, we really, really thank you for your contribution. And Dodd summed it up so excellently in the comments. He said, I believe Amanda Garcia is Tennessee's highest integrity and most deeply skilled professional in energy and climate and water issues. Among other topics, she takes on a wonderful professional role model for all young and evolving professionals. So just a huge, huge thank you, Amanda.
Thank you so much. And thank you for those incredibly kind words, Dodd. It's been such a wonderful way to start my day this morning. I just thank you all for giving me the time to speak with you. And it's just great to see so many wonderful, engaged professionals here. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Amanda. And we do have a small gift that will be coming your way. So look out for that as just a thank you from TWIG for spending your morning with us. So with that, I am going to pass it over to Elaine to do some TWIG announcements.
Thank you, Jen. And I've got to second Dodd's words. Thank you, Amanda, so much for spending the morning with us and just for your important work through SELC. We appreciate what you do. And welcome to everyone to the first Friday in May. I'm Elaine Boyd, serving as the Vice President this year, and we really appreciate each of you for spending your first Friday in May with us. And Jen, I don't know if the slides are up. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I see them up. What are other people seeing?
I see Amanda's slides. PowerPoint.
Okay. Amanda, do you mind stop sharing and then I'll try to share again? Okay, let's see if this works. You seeing that? Okay.
Great. Yes, thank you. So I just want to remind everybody that we appreciate you being here. I hope you can hear me. I'm having some technical difficulties this morning. Our mission, as always, is to empower, inspire, and connect women who are committed to environmental sustainability. And we thank you all for helping us to achieve that goal again this year. We couldn't do what we do without our sponsors, so a huge shout out to our sponsors. We're thankful for each and every one of you. And I know the screen looks really packed, but we have room for more. So if you or your organization are interested in becoming a sponsor, please go to our website and just look at the information under Become a Sponsor. We'd love to have you. And we also couldn't do what we do without our members. So thank you to our new and renewing members. If this is your first visit with us, we invite you to go to the website, and we've got a great deal for you to join TWIG. So we appreciate all of our members. Just wanted to give a shout out to Allie and Kim, our leaders for the Iris's Book Club, and all those who participated in the Iris Book Club events last month. If you're interested in getting involved in the Iris's Book Club, please go to our website and sign up for their newsletter so you'll be engaged for their next book and next activity. And also wanted to give a shout out to all those who came by and visited us at our tent during Earth Day. We had a great time greeting many people who had not heard of TWIG, but were very interested, and reconnecting with some people. So hopefully some of our visitors are on with us today. And then I wanted to mention, there are actually 3 community events associated with Brooklyn Heights. I wanted to just start with giving some information about Brooklyn Heights Community Garden. It's an urban farm and community building hub that honors the land, nurtures people, and inspires a more beautiful, loving world. And that's, you see the address there, 1830 Haynes Street. So they have 3 events coming up. On Saturday, May 14th, from 9 to 11 a.m., they have the Growing Grannies event, which is for communing, socializing, pulling weeds, getting your hands dirty, and growing. And then in the afternoon, that same day, 3 to 7 p.m., they have the Speakeasy event, which is actually something they were sponsored by the Curb Center for this event. It includes a community dinner and a workshop on sharing stories. It's free, but it requires registration. So go to our website and you get a link to their website. And the fabulous Renee has already put a link to their website in the chat. And then the final event is Wednesday, May 18th from 5 to 7 p.m. It's called Energy Exchange. And they describe it this way: bring yourself, your love, your hands, your babies and grandbabies, and join Miss Pearl in the gardens, getting our hands dirty, dancing, and being in community. Sounds like a fabulous time. So I want to pivot before we close to Renee Barker, our past president, for an announcement.
Thanks, Elaine. Hi, everyone. I just wanted to say a quick thank you to all of those who donated during the big payback, which was yesterday, 24 hours to support nonprofits in Middle Tennessee. And we just wanted to really say thank you to our donors. We were able to raise $364, and all of that we tried to put into our pool of funding to really support our members and provide events and content that we hope serves our mission and keeps you coming back. So thank you to all of our donors.
Thank you again, everybody, for spending your first Friday in May with us. Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers. Have a great rest of the day and month, and we'll see you in June.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Great meeting. Good to